about it. And so, having done nothing but one pass of cleaning, I'm going to create a little hemisphere. Now, it should be no thicker than 1/4 of an inch, and I've actually made mine a little bit thinner here. We don't have any slip made from this clay, so I'm going to just set that on a little bit of water. And I'm going to do the same thing with this side. This is one of the simplest whistles you can make. We're going to make a little ball, a little hollow ball. And you can see how this clay is a little bit short on the edge. It's a little bit dry. I could squish some water on it, and it would be a little handier for me to work with. It would be way easier to get the rocks out of, too. So you spray it and make it gooey and gushy, and then you can really squeeze it and the rocks pop right out. I'm going to take those two balls, tag them, and I wet the surface. Now I'm going to take my sophisticated tool, the popsicle stick, or the coffee stir stick, and work those two edges together. And the reason I want to do this with a tool instead of my finger is that this is going to give me better penetration. It'll penetrate pressure deeper into the clay wall and give me a better junction. If I use my fingers, I've got that soft pad of flesh in front, and so it'll smooth things out, but it won't give me the penetration that I need. Now, as we continue to work in this class, we'll make a little bit of slip out of the material that out of the clay that we're working with, so that we can scratch up and slip. And one way to make this nice and round and smooth is just to play around with it on the table here and roll it around. Okay? So you all agree I have a hollow ball. I'm going to set that aside. I'm going to make something else here too. This is clay that I've already refined. I want you to make some of these today. I want you to make beads. I want you to make animals. I want you to make little whistles. Try pinching out a little plate. So you can have a lot of fun just taking a piece of clay, separating it out on a yakitori skewer. This could be a coat hanger, something else like that. You can actually roll it on the skewer. This is actually a wonderful way to make a hollow tube. See, I can use the yakitori skewer as a way of rolling the clay. So I could make little clay individual beads like this. Etc. Now, if these were fired in a little bowl inside of a sawdust firing or a Sager firing or our pit firing, they would all be different colors. You know, they'd have a little bit of color variation if you made them out of different clays. And they take up no room, but they're kind of a wonderful thing to fire. Another thing I like to do for bead making is to make impressions. You know, a lot of different cultures in the world develop their decorating procedures for their clay work depending upon the kind of clay that they used. And in the Southwest, they can make some, you know, pretty refined clay. They knew how to refine clay. But I had restored, and I have in my own collection, 4 pieces of what's called knock ceramics, and it's from Nigeria. And there was a project that somehow diverted a river that exposed all of the ceramic graveyard tombstones from the knock culture. And the tombstones had heads on the top of them that were broken off and sold separately from the other parts of them. But what they did for decorating their work was to make little pinwheels out of clay that had texture on them. So you could take a bead, texture it, put it on the end of a stick, and then roll it against the side of a pot in order to make a cool impression. That clay body is full of junk, full of rocks and pebbles and stuff like that. It's not at all pure. So they couldn't carve without destroying the surface. A little seed pot or your little bead pot might come in. We might take these and put it in there and have a nice little package so that these things are not separate. We can also string these beads on nichrome wire. The wire that we use for the electric kiln, we have in rolls, stainless steel wire or nichrome, so we could put a string of unfired clay beads on a piece of nichrome wire, and then they could dry out on that piece of wire and be fired in any kind of firing, and we'd pull them out and they'd all still be together and they'd all be different colors. Yes.
Stainless steel wire too?
Stainless
Either
steel
one?
wire. You know, you can even use just plain iron wire in
Like
the firing
baling
kit.
wire.
Baling wire works great.
Really?
It just gets a little smaller each time it goes up to red heat, comes back down, it sloughs off a coating of slag that is part of the diameter, so it gets smaller and smaller and smaller. But I used to fire chicken wire in Raku all the time.
Oh, really?
You know, I take all these clay parts, put them in
Part 2, the Ocarina.
Oh boy, this is really good stuff here. But it's short. You see how it just cracked on the rim there? But it's very dense. You'll notice a difference in the density of the clay, and the purest stuff is the densest. You know, it is really tough. When you squeeze it, it's not mushy at all. Even when it's quite wet, it has a great deal of plasticity to it. So this little ball right here is that way.
So density goes together with plasticity?
Plasticity goes together with density. Plasticity is purity of clay.
Okay.
Really purity of clay. And if you were looking for durability, your most durable product would be from the most plastic clay.
Though you said primary clay is not very plastic, though.
That's true. Yeah, that's true. But this is not primary clay. This wasn't formed here. This traveled here. You know, in the geology of Marin County, Mount Tamalpais is not a volcano. It was upheaved from plate displacement, right? The Pacific plate came and crashed. It came from San Mateo. It made that whole upheaval of Marin headlands. Mount Tamalpais, all that stuff is from an upheaval as opposed to a volcanic kind of a mountain, which is a different deal altogether. Now, these don't always have to be exactly the same size to fit, and you can make all different shapes of things. It's just that a sphere is the one that is easiest to make a whistle out of. So now I've got a second sphere. The second whistle. I'm not going to refine it any more than that. I'm going to leave it funky just to show you it can be done. But I am going to take a piece of nicely refined clay, and now I'm going to roll it into a little Tootsie Roll, just about the size of my finger. Doesn't have to be very long. This is where it gets complicated, so pay attention. I'm going to cut this on an angle. Yeah, come around. We can gather closer together. Those of you in the front row, these seats will come down. We could sit a little lower. Can you see? Yeah. Okay. Here we go. You know, I'm going to get we've got a new contraption. We'll try and do a video feed on my demos. There's a new goodie that we have that can looks like a little table lamp. And you can put it over your demo and project it onto the screen. But I didn't want to use it today because I didn't want to be demoing and have you look at the screen.
Right.
It's once removed. So here you are.
I'll put this on
Here
mine,
I
too.
am. I've got my hollow sphere, right? You all agree that's what it is. It's about 1/4 of an inch thick. I'm going to place this on an angle. right? That is critically important. We can't do it like this.
No.
And so we got to stick this on at an angle. And we did find that some of our whistles started to come apart a little bit because they weren't scratched up. So I'm going to texture this just a tiny amount and hope that this is going to adhere perfectly. And then I'm going to use my coffee stir stick primary tool to blend it in and make a connection all the way around. What we found is that any kind of an edge, a crack, a seam, is where the clay will begin to crack. So cracks always begin on those edges. I could take another little smidge of clay here and make a little coil and maybe add a little backup to that. We never want to trap air. Air will cause the clay to hold moisture, and it's the moisture that explodes when you have an air pocket in your clay. Also, because the clay shrinks, that air pocket becomes compressed air. So sometimes your things will crack apart because of that. So now I have, and I'm going to go ahead and lay this flat on the top because I want to emphasize the fact that that is one continuous line. Top of this to the top of there. If you don't have that, it's going to be more complicated to make the whistle out of. Now, I have customized my coffee stir stick, and I'll give you a demo of how to do that. And you too can have the master's tool. So we have a piece of sandpaper here. I've cut the end off square with the scissors, and now I'm going to sharpen this into a chisel end.
So straight.
Straight and sharp. It's no longer the 1/4 inch thickness, it's now a sharp end. Now just here, which is at the edge of my mouthpiece, right? Remember this was at an angle, it's at an angle here. So just about here, I know I'm going to get into some solid clay, I'm going to go straight down. And I'm going to make 2 side-by-side penetrations into the hollow cavity of the ball. 2 sideways, 2 sticks wide. Okay? Yes, through the solid end of the stem into the ball.
No space in between.
No. But now watch how this develops. One width, is that my sharp one? Yeah. So I'm going to lay out my opening before I cut it. You see what that is? It's 2 wide, 1 deep.
Okay.
So it's 1 coffee stir stick in this direction, 2 in this direction. That's the correct proportion. And now because I've sharpened this tool and made a chisel out of it, it's sharp enough to cut right into the clay, and this is where you get a rattle and a whistle in a combination, because that little piece fell inside, and it's not going to come back out. It doesn't matter. But I want you to see this. I want you to see that this side is solid. That plane, straight down, is solid clay. There's no hollow end here.
The finger you put on there is still solid.
Finger that I put on there is still solid. So on this side it's solid clay, on this side it's hollow clay.
Got it.
Now, I'm going to take my yakitori, or my tool, and I'm going to cut on an angle, the bottom edge. Now, the diagram of this mechanical thing is on your handout. The last page of your handout has a sideways view. Can you grab your handout for me? So there's a little picture of that. talking about, okay? That picture. And that tells you, this is my aperture right there, so this is solid on that side, hollow on that side, and I just cut an edge. Now I do it a little differently. I cut from the bottom and start to taper.
And they cut from the top.
And then, yeah, you can cut from the top or the bottom, but then I'm going to flatten this on the top to improve the shape of that chisel edge and push it down. And I'm going to wet this. Now I want to penetrate this solid clay, and I want to have this stick come out exactly on the edge of that reed. Again, look at this diagram and see that that airway goes through there and it exactly hits the point of that reed. That is the key to making a whistle whistle. So I'm going to very carefully, I wet my stick here. I sometimes use 2 sticks for this. I'll penetrate through.
And you can't go from the other direction, it won't work.
Can't go from the other direction. Now, you see where my thing started to come out there?
No. I can't see it.
Seems
Okay.
low. Isn't it low?
A distinctive, sharp slit. I'm going to very carefully remove this. And I'm going to try and clean this up just a little bit, but it is just a slit. It's not a hole.
It's really tiny.
It's really a tiny little hole. Okay? Now, I'm going to wet this again. I can come back in a second time.
Before you do that.
It's a flat hallway. Right? But it's going to come out then. There, you see it? Okay? Running across there. Now what I need to do is to line up that reed exactly with that slit. And if I've done it all right, then I'll have a whistle. And I found that as I retract this, sometimes the clay that it's pushed out of the way and displaced will be drawn back into the slot and plug it up. So I just took another little tool. That's why I said sometimes I work with 2 of them. So now when I look through this slit, I'm looking at the sharp edge of that reed. Okay, you with me? What do you bet it works? A nickel. I'll bet you a nickel.
I'll go more, but it'll work.
Yeah.
That it'll work? No, I would say I'm betting that it'll work.
Yeah, we all bet it would work.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so the factors are hollow, solid mouthpiece. The mistake that people make is that they make a big old hole here, and the air just goes all over the place. It's not directed to that little reed. Have you guys ever done this? Forgive me. That's what we're doing. We're lining up that air pressure with the edge of something that'll buzz or vibrate. In this case, theoretically, I could blow on this. Probably I need to have beer in it in order to make that work. But this is the same thing. Half the air is going in, half the air is going out. It's coming around and trying to get back out the hole, but it's running into the air that's splitting, and somehow or another that creates the sound. So, now, you want to go to the next note. You never put a hole in front of the airway, or you never put a nose or an eyeball, if you're making a character out of it, in the way of this. This needs to be unencumbered. But you can make a little hole off to the right, and I usually figure out which way it feels best to hold it. So holding it like this, I could put a hole here, one there, one there. That's where my fingers like to sit. And I can make a hole that's this big. Now let's try it.
Yay!
So I got a whole note step there. So let's go again. Another depression on this side.
Does the length
2
of,
more.
does the length of the neck affect the sound too?
Not at all. It's the relationship of the size of the reed relative to the volume of the chamber. And so some whistles will go 4 notes. Some whistles I've had to plug them up because I couldn't even get a second note out of them. This damn thing, I mean this fish, I could not get a second note out of it. And it has something to do with the shape of the chamber. You know, maybe if I was blowing it like this, I got a fish whistle from the Yucatan over there, you know, and it's coming in the end, so it's a different shape. And of course it's got, but these ones from the side, you know, I'm just imagining what the air has to do to get in and get out, and it doesn't work that great. So if you make a bigger volume, then hand me that largest one there, please. This one. Or that one's good too, that's a big one. No hole. Bigger volume, lower tone. About the same volume. Kind of half notes. These could be a little larger. The way you tune it is that you make, you get your note, and then you start a little hole, and you enlarge the size of that hole until you get a whole step. Ba, 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 on up.
Oh, great.
And if you make a little hole, you want to add a half note, and then it doesn't matter when you make your notes. I got 4 in this one. I didn't have, you got to get them all covered really well to get back to that original. You know, and this is clay out of the ground. I'm sitting here licking it, touching it, blowing on it with my mouth. It doesn't smell like horse shit or crap or anything like that. It could be full of bacteria, but I am too. And I've never, and I have has any of you ever gotten sick from blowing on these whistles that have been in my class? You get sick from eating bad food, but we don't get sick from blowing on found clay whistles. So, you see that's the same note? So it won't matter. It's whether I have 3 uncovered or 3 covers. And it doesn't matter which 3 are going to make that sequence. So I could go here, 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 and it will all be the same because it's the number of holes that you're letting out. And we will, I'd like to have you have 10 things each next week. And we would load 1 in a charcoal bisque firing by way of a sagger. We would load 1 in a dung firing, 1 batch of work in a dung firing, which we would take back home next Friday. We would also load a black sawdust firing. Molly, hold up a black sawdust fired piece. That one was burnished and sawdust fired. And as this clay dries out, then you can smooth it with a tool or with your popsicle stick. And it's not dried out. It's not wanting to do this. And burnish it. And this burnishing process, I've got a